In this presentation, we will continue on with our proprietorship comprehensive problem, this time recording transactions on January 28th. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Those being our transactions related to the expenses. We're going to record expenses related to paying the utility bill, paying the phone bill, paying the wages. We're going to do this all at the same time and just record this because they're going to be similar in nature. And you can think of these as similar to a business recording their expenses at the end of the month. We're going to record kind of our monthly types of transactions, those expenses, those things we pay for on a periodic basis, often a monthly type of basis. So we'll start off with the, what are we paying? The utilities bill here. So we're going to pay the utilities. And first thing we can ask is cash affected. And of course it said paid. So yeah, that's the first thing we'll deal with. We're going to say cash has a debit balance. We're going to make it go down because we paid stuff with it, and therefore we will do the opposite thing to it as its normal balance, or a credit. So we're going to right click and copy the cash. We're going to go down to our transaction. We're going to go on to the bottom of it. Notice we're building what is easiest first. We're not building from top to bottom, from debit to credit. We're building whatever is easiest for us to think about first, that typically being cash. So within cell H15, we're going to right click and paste 123 cash. Then I'm going to indent that, probably done for you already, by going to the Home tab, Alignment Group, and increase the indentation. We're going to go on the credit side in cell J15. The credit will be 1,300. To do that, we're going to say negative 1,300. Then we'll debit something. I'm going to do that with a little bit of a formula, just a negative of that number. We could type it in 1,300, that would be fine too, but I like to use the formula whenever possible. Now we just need to know what that account will be. What do we pay for again? Utilities. So if we go through our trial balance, we're gonna say utilities, and we see utilities expense. And it will be an expense. Now you might be thinking, why is it an expense when we haven't done any expense before? We've paid stuff before, and why is this one an expense? And for example, when we bought equipment, or we bought insurance, or we bought supplies, it was not an expense. And the reason is not because it happens to be utilities per se. There's nothing about utilities that makes it an expense inherently. What makes it an expense versus these other things we paid for is that we've already consumed the utilities. And there could be times in the future when we prepay utilities. If we bought, a year's worth of utilities, or if we paid the utilities to help us make something like inventory, then we wouldn't expense it at this point in time. But if it's a service company, we'd pay the utility bill typically monthly in conjunction with when we actually consumed it, as opposed to, say, insurance, where we pay for it before we consume it. And that's really going to be the difference. So you'll start to just memorize this. You'll start to memorize that prepaid insurance just goes into the prepaid because it's insurance, and that the utilities goes into an expense because it's utilities. But it's important to kind of know the underlying reason for when things change, so we know the reason. And the reason is because we consumed the utilities close to the same point in time that we paid it, therefore expensing it when we consume it, not when we pay it typically. They just happen to be in the same point in time. And we in the same sense, we record the insurance expense as an expense when we consume it, not when we pay it, and they happen to happen at different points in time. We pay for it before we consume it. So we're going to debit the utilities expense. Now all expenses all have debit balances, and they only go up in the debit direction. So we're always just going to basically debit the expense. So if you see an expense, what are we going to do to it? Probably debit it almost like 99% of the time. So we're going to copy the expense, right click and copy. We'll put that up top in H14, right click and paste 123. Okay, so let's do all of them first, and then we'll post these out. They'll be similar in nature. So the next one's on 128, where we paid the phone bill. So once again, is cash affected? Yeah, we paid the phone bill. Cash is a debit balance. We're going to make it go down by doing the opposite thing to it, a credit. So I'm going to right click and copy cash. I'm going to put that on the bottom of our transaction. Right click and paste 123 in cell H18. Now, as we do this, note we could have done this all in one journal entry, like these three things in one journal entry, but I think it's better to do it in three. One, because it'll be easier to see, and two, because in practice we probably are writing three different checks, and therefore the system will have 3 different transactions. But just in terms of recording it, we could do it in one journal entry or 3, just depends on our preference. So we're going to go up top, Home tab, Alignment, Increase, Indenting, probably done for you already. We're going to be in the credit column. How much did we pay for the phone bill? I believe the phone bill we paid, was it $1,100 for the phone. We're going to debit something for that same amount. We're going to do that with a little formula of negative of that number. Now we just need the account. And once again, you're probably just going to learn and memorize that the phone is just going to be telephone expense. And you could group it into utilities expense too, but most companies will break out the phone bill in the typic. But again, we're not putting it in an expense because we paid it. We put it in the expense because we pay the phone bill pretty close to when we actually consumed the phone service, and therefore recognizing the expense when we consumed it, which happens to be a pretty similar time period to when we paid for it. So we're going to right click and copy. We're going to put that up top in H17, right click and paste 1, 2, 3. And we'll do one more before we post all 3 of these, which is going to be great. We're going to do one on 128. That's going to be for wages. Now, we're going to put wages here. We're not going to focus in on payroll and get into the payroll type of journal entry transaction, which is a very complex transaction because we have to deal with withholdings. But we want to make sure that payroll is here in a kind of a simplified form so that we get an idea, of what wages is and how it's going to be an important, obviously, expense. Now, so we'll just do it in a simplified fashion here, and then when we talk about payroll in a different presentation or whatnot, we can get into the more complications. But for now, just note that payroll, if it wasn't for all the complicated laws and whatnot with withholdings and all that kind of stuff, it would be just like any other expense. So the basis of it, this is where we start when we start in the payroll. It's just like any other expense. If we shook hands with an employee before all the other regulations and said, hey, we're going to pay you, $5,000 at the end of the month, and we shook hands, then at the end of the month, is cash affected? Yeah, cash is going to go down by $5,000, and the debit will go to wages expense of some kind. So the basis of the payroll journal entry is just the same. It's just that the business has so many different responsibilities now to kind of withhold and pay taxes for the employee and make sure, kind of police the employee to make sure that they're paying taxes and pay the employer portion of taxes. So we won't get into all that right now. We'll just get down to the theory of it, talk about payroll taxes later. So it's cash affected. Yep, it's going to go down. Has a debit balance. We're going to do the opposite thing to it, a credit. Right click and copy. We're going to put that on the bottom once again in cell H21. Right click and paste 1, 2, 3. The amount's going to be for $5,000. We'll put on the credit side in J21 with a negative $5,000. We will then debit something for that $5,000. I'm going to use a little formula to do that, negative of this number. Let's indent this as we go. It's probably done for you already. I'll do it here. It's in the Home tab, Alignment Group, increase the indentation. And then we just need to know what that amount will, what this account will be. And it will be, of course, wages expense. So it's just an expense for when we pay the employees, and it's the same reasoning for anything else. Why is it an expense? Not because we paid it necessarily, but because we have consumed the use of work during that time period or similar or close to the point in time of payment, and therefore we're recording the expense when we consumed the work, when we got the work done, and that happens to be close to the same point in time that we make the payment for it. So we're going to right click and copy, and we're going to right click here and paste 1, 2, 3. Now we know that, just to note here, we will have an adjusting entry for payroll because we know that we do pay payroll periodically, and there might be some payroll that wasn't recorded or properly in the right time period. So we actually will have an adjusting entry to shore up payroll, to make sure that the expense for this month actually represents what we actually consumed in terms of services, which is separate from what we paid. Whether we paid for it or not, we need to record the payroll that we've consumed during this time period. We'll fully do that with an adjusting entry. Okay, so now we've got these 3 journal entries we need to record. You could do that by making things really small, to go to the GL to record that over here. I made things really small by hitting the minus arrow. We're going to do that by keeping it at 130% and freezing the panes. Because we have 3 journal entries, I'm going to try to do something a little different. We usually just work on the last journal entry, But because we have 3, we could get mixed up. So when that happens to me, I make one of them a different color, typically green. So I'm gonna select this one first. I'm gonna let go, right click on it, go to the bucket here, and make it green. So the greens are the ones I usually work on. And that one will kind of keep my eye here, so it'll limit my mistakes. So then we're gonna go to the right just a little bit. All the way up top, we're gonna freeze the pane. So we've got column G flush. We're in cell K1. We're gonna go to the View tab, Windows group, freeze panes, and freeze the pane. So now when we go to the right, of course, G through J are now frozen. We're looking for utilities expense, and if we look at our trial balance, that's way down here. It's like our third expense account. It's going to be the same order on the GL. So we'll go to the right. We've got the assets, we got the liabilities, we got the equity, and then we've got wages expense. Or we're looking for utilities, so utilities is right underneath it. So here it is. We're in cell AI15. So AI15 on the debit side of utilities, we want to pick up that 13,000. So we're going to say equals and point to that 13,000 and enter. There we have it, going up to 13,000. That then being found on the trial balance, which we can see if we go right to the left of the frozen panes and click right. There's our 13,000. It's bringing net income down. It's putting us out of balance by 13,000. If we go to cash, is our second transaction, our second part of this journal entry. That, of course, is our first account here. And so we're going to go up to cash, first account on the GL as well. So we want to be on the credit side. So I'm in cell P16. Within cell P16, we're going to say equals, point to that 1,300. I said 13, it's 1,300. So the 45,000 is going to go down by 1,300 to the 43,700. If we go back to the right then, there's the 43,700 on the trial balance. We're back in balance. So what happened here, of course, cash went down because we paid it. The other side is an expense. The expense going up, bringing net income down. Net income calculated as revenue minus expenses. Note what happens to total equity here. These are still what we have. These are our assets of 139,700. We owe that to a third party, to the liabilities, meaning assets minus liabilities, 125,700. That's what would be left over on a book value basis if we were to, say, liquidate the sole proprietorship. And that 125,700 is what is down here. All of this is 125,700. All of this is equity, meaning it's a credit balance and it went down by this debit to utilities because we paid it out. That brings down net income, brings down total equity. Okay, so we'll do the same thing for this next transaction. I'm going to unblue this one here. Now there's a couple ways you could do that. You could select the area, right click, bucket, and hit this blue item. Now if you can't find that one, it's on this little wheel here, and it's on the standards, and it's this one right there. Now the other thing you can do is you could paintbrush it to use the formatting to make it blue. Now what you don't want to do is just click this cell and paintbrush the whole thing. Format paint it, in other words, paintbrush this thing. Because if you do that, it'll change the format of, say, this cell and maybe some others. What you want to do is pick all these so that you have the same format for a similar type of grouping of cells. Then go to the Home tab, Clipboard, this paintbrush, Format Painter, and then paintbrush. And you can just click the top one, it'll do the whole thing like that. So those two ways you can do that. Then I'm going to make this one green because that's what we're working on by selecting it, right-clicking, make it green. And now we'll record the telephone. Now telephone's way at the bottom down here, so it's going to be way on the end, I guess, on the GL. So we've got assets, we've got liabilities, we've got equity, we've got revenue, expenses, and all the way over here. Last one, we've got the telephone way over in AM15. We're on the debit side. Remember that we're always going to be debiting the expenses. They pretty much only go up in the debit direction. So when AM15, we're going to say equals, point to that 1,100, bringing the balance up to 1,100. This 1,100 then can be found on the trial balance. If we go just to the left of the frozen panes and click right, then we see it right here. We're out of balance by 1,100. Net income went down by 1,100, as did total equity. The other side's going to go to cash. So here's cash. Here's cash up top. First account on the GL as well. So we're going to be here on the credit side in cell P17. Within P17, we're going to say equals, point to that 1,100, bringing the 43,700 down by 1,100 to 42,600. That then, of course, found on the trial balance, putting us back in balance. Now we're just going to do the last one here. So I'm just going to ungreen this, selecting this item. This time I'll just right click on it, the paintbrush bucket, go into the blue. Okay, now this one's the last one, so we don't need to make it green because we're back to the normal process. It's the last one here. So here's wages expense. Here's wages expense on the trial balance. It's going to be the same order on the GL. So I'm just going to go to the right. Here's assets. Here's liabilities. Here's equity. And here's the expenses. We're looking for wages expense. There it is up top. That's the one. That's what we want. So we want to be on the debit side. We're in cell AI9. Within AI9, we're picking up this 5,000. So within AI9, we're going to say equals. Point to that 5,000. Bring the balance up from 0 by 5,000 to 5,000. That 5,000 can also be found on the trial balance. If we just click to the left of the frozen panes and go right, then we see the 5,000 here, increasing the expense, putting us out of balance, decreasing net income. Now we're going to record the cash side. So here's cash. Here's cash up top. First account on the trial balance. First account on the GL as well. So we want to be down here on the credit side. So we're in cell P18. Within P18, we're going to say equals, point to that 5,000, bringing the 42,600 down by 5,000 to 37,600. Scrolling back to the trial balance, we'll see that amount on the trial balance, and we're back in balance. So what happened here, we recorded these three expenses and paid the cash. Cash, of course, went down. The other side is the equity section. The equity section in the income statement being part of total equity. And those expense accounts went up, as expense accounts pretty much always do. They always go up in the debit direction, meaning employees never pay us, we pay employees. The utilities company doesn't pay us, we pay them. Telephone company doesn't pay us, we pay them. And as they go up, net income goes down. As net income goes down, total equity goes down as well. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.